Well, all right. Seems like I'm back, still in the introduction. Got a little housekeeping to do. In my disarray of putting together this last part, the ending, I deleted several videos that, just couldn't work. I went down a bunch of rabbit trails, and you'll hear me say that again in the next video. But it turns out I left out the first part of Revelation, probably, perhaps one of the most important parts of going into the letters and setting up this next video. And all these videos, this introduction was designed for the viewer to watch them in sequence. It just kind of stacks up. And if you jump in on one of them without listening to the ones that went before, you're just not gonna get the intended message. So just putting that out there. So let's get to it. When you get into Revelation, it starts off that this is a prophecy that was delivered to John through the angel of Jesus. And in that first little section, in verse 3, it says, blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of the prophecy and heed the things which are written in it, for the time is near. So there we go. We get right to it. You got to pay attention because the opportunity is for you is now. Near means just whenever you're ready. And then it gets into the introductions, and it talks about the testimony of Jesus. And several times in the book of Revelation, it says, for those who hold to the testimony of Jesus, for the testimony of Jesus is the prophecy, is the spirit of prophecy. And so that's us looking at the man Jesus, which I've said earlier is, I believe he was the Son of God when he arrived. And, we're to look to him to say, show me the way. And you get to the book of Revelation, and Jesus has already overcome. He was already slain, and he already did all the work that he's charging us to do, and which is crucifixion of that other image, the false prophet image that we have, and resurrect into our spiritual self, our authentic self. And it goes on to describe what I believe to be Christ, and he said, he appeared like that of a son of man. And, this is the angel of Jesus and delivering this to John, and John knows Jesus. And I'm just taking a position here that represents Christ, that is the Spirit Christ available for all of us. And Jesus was the chosen one to come in and demonstrate to us the power of Christ, the significance of Christ, the Messiah. And then it goes on to say, the 7 lampstands and the 7 churches. Later on, we're going to see that the churches are the 7 spirits before the throne. And so the discussion here is going to bring that forward and look at each of these as one of the 7 spirits. And there's 7 churches and there's 7 spirits. And just to get right to it, the first letter is to a message to Ephesus. And there's a lot that's going on in Ephesus throughout the Bible. And, they had the goddess Diana, and I won't get into it, but it's mentioned a couple places in the Bible. But the way these letters work is that the message is, it starts off with a compliment and say, I'm pleased about these things, but then I'm going to give you a warning about what's left, and a warning specific to this particular spiritual center. And the first is, we've talked about, is symbolized by Pharaoh in Egypt. When you go to the Old Testament, in the Old Testament, that applies to this first spirit. And the beast in Daniel that correlates with this is the lion standing as a man. And that's a god in the Egyptian times that that was a patron for the pharaohs and preceded them in battle. So it starts off and says, I know your deeds, your toil, and your perseverance, and that you can't tolerate evil men and false apostles, and you've had perseverance. And that's what happens in that coming out of that lower self. That's that place of thriving and surviving, that part of us that needs to feel safe and secure. But he says, I have this against you, and here's the warnings. And the first one, he's speaking to Eve, the Eve part of us, that you have left your first love. She's saying, hey, Eve, you've left Adam. But Eve's probably raising her hand and saying, but what's the very next warning? Therefore, he's talking to Adam, therefore remember from where you've fallen. Adam, you've forgotten from where you've fallen. And Eve isn't even supposed to know. She's subconscious. So he's saying, Adam, you've forgotten from where you need to remember that. You need to become aware of your spiritual nature. And then it talks about the deeds of the Nicolaitans. That's kind of taking a look at how religion has distorted things back in the day. And then he says, to him who overcomes, which every letter ends like that, and this is speaking to an individual and us individually. So to you that overcomes, I will grant to you to eat from the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God. So that refers to, the back end of Revelation. That's the goal. It's also referred to in Genesis as the target, as the goal. And that's what that's referring to. Recall that, this is Adam's asleep. The behemoth kind of applies in this place as the unconscious consciousness. And I'm going to read out of, and I apologize for reading, I'm going to be looking down. I need to learn how to put this stuff up on the screen. I just haven't figured that out yet. In chapter 40, verse 15, behold now, behemoth, which I made as well as you. And we go back to the book of Enoch, and behemoth and Leviathan were made the same time that Adam and Eve were made. In fact, the monsters of the sea and of the earth were made even before God made man in his image. Behold now, his strength in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. That's the lower self. And he is the first of the ways of God. So the natural body, the unconscious consciousness, the first Adam became a living soul. That's the persona that we're in, to do that caterpillar crawl that's illustrated for us in the entire Old Testament. And then it said, let us make her bring his sword. The only person that can slay behemoth is the Christ in us. Surely the mountains bring him food, and all the beasts of the field play there. So, that's the lion and the bear and the leopard. And then here's a curious thing. It says, under the lotus plants he lies down, in the covert of the reeds and the marsh. The lotus plants cover him with shade. The willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes to his mouth. Can anyone capture him when he is on watch? With barbs, can anyone pierce his nose? Well, he's the unconscious consciousness. There's no way to see that guy and pierce that guy. He's under the lotus plants. In Eastern religions, the practice of raising that energy, it's every chakra has an associated lotus flower with it, and it has a color. And this lower self here, this is the lowest of the earth, which every great man had to go into Egypt. Jesus descended into the lower parts of the earth, and he had to go into Egypt. He went in as a little baby. It's different from all the other men that went into Egypt. But all of us have to go through Egypt and resurrect our authentic self. And it says here, he hides under he's in the shade. So I mean, he's asleep. He's unconscious. He gets directed through the authority of the subconscious or the serpent persona. And even if the rivers rage, man, he's not going to be affected because he's not awake. And then the other thing, when you go back to Eastern religions, this part of the body, the sacrum, is where you have the coiled serpent, 3.5 coils, and we see reference to the number 3.5. Quite a bit, and that's called the Kundalini energy. It's that primordial, dormant energy that is symbolic to the Christ energy. I mean, they're kind of one and the same. We kind of view Christ as coming down and going in and then coming back up. The Eastern religions, they said it's sitting there waiting for us to release it. And it's the cold serpent, which is, I think, one of the reasons why the shiny one, Nakash, has, adopted the call name serpent in the Bible. I mean, that's just how they're connected. And I won't get into the colors and all that going back to red, the color for this is red, and that's the red dragon. We see the red dragon in the book of Revelation. And that's the serpent matched up with the color of this particular chakra. So let's go on to the second letter, the message to Smyrna. That's our second nature. That's the sacral. The first one's the root chakra. This one is the sacral chakra. That's kind of our generative area and emotions and sensual desires. The first one's associated with earth. This one's associated with water. And it says, I know your tribulation and your poverty, but you are rich. And that gets back to, we come into these bodies, and that's the body is poverty. And when we depend on the body, we're still in two. And in the book of Thomas, God tells us, or Jesus tells us that that's poverty when we depend on the body, because we're still depending on that natural body nature, unaware of our true nature, and that we're living in the natural body mode. And then he says here, they say they are, in the blasphemy by those who say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. And we're going to see that reference again. And, you go back to Paul's 16 letters. He says a lot about Jews, and, that side of the equation, they look at Paul and say, man, you're really being cruel. You're kind of trashing us over there, using, criticizing us. And symbolically, what Jews represents are those that say we see. They're the ones that have, fallen into an ideology, a religion focus, and said, hey, I'm saved, I'm spiritualized. They made it up the other way. This goes back to John 10, where Jesus says, hey, there are those that, the wide gate, they've climbed up another way, and they're thieves and robbers. And if they want to find the real door, my door, the shepherd's door, they've got to become blind again and say that they don't see, and come back down and go through the door that opens your eyes. And the synagogue of Satan is the body tabernacle for those personas that are still in the natural body, because that serpent persona is ruling your life in that false image mode, and it is a synagogue for Satan. The body tabernacle is being ruled by the serpent persona, and that's what that means. And then it says a couple other things, but it said, he who overcomes will not be hurt by the second death. So the first one was you get the tree of life. This one, you're not going to be hurt by the second death. That's saying that he who overcomes, at the end of the day, and he wakes up and he comes to full consciousness, when you do die physically, that's when you go to the original kingdom from which you came, and you live forever. you've completed this task, this test. You've run the race successfully. The third letter, the message to Pergamon. And this is an area of commerce back in the day, power, influence, and intellect. They had a lot going on. And here it says, and this is associated with the leopard, with the 4 heads. So this is kind of where that persona, ego persona resides in this sacral chakra, the power chakra. And that leopard is those personas, but it also could signify the first 4 spiritual sinners under the dominion of the serpent. And here where it says, this is, I know where you dwell, where Satan's throne is. So this is where that part of us resides. And you hold fast to my name and did not deny my faith, even in the day of Antipas, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan dwells. And that's just kind of, symbolic of our higher self being killed by our lower self from time to time as we make our ascension. But I have a few things against you, because you have there some who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who kept teaching Balak and put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel. You eat things sacrificed to idols and commit acts of immorality. So this refers back to religion again, but also the commingling of the higher and lower self. And that's kind of what happened that led to the destruction of Jerusalem, as you had the descendants of Jacob, intermingling with those of Esau and Ishmael, and the higher self was trying to accommodate the lower self. Stop fighting, and let's see if we can coexist. And you could be deceived to think, well, that's working for a while, but eventually, if you do reach the promised land, you're not going to be able to hold it with that kind of mindset. You're just as good as dead. And so that's the message there. And then it refers to the Nicolaitans again. It's like, hey, those that are holding on to adverse religious practices, you need to stop doing that. And then it says, if the one who overcomes, you'll get the hidden manna, you give them the stone of white, and you have a new name. But it's in this place where the battle for dominion of authority and dominion happens in the sequence of events that follow. And that next video is going to walk you through that. The next one is the message to Thyatira. That's the heart center. And it's associated with the air. Pergamon is associated with fire. And you'll see how that plays out in the sequence of events to follow. And and they're given a compliment. I know your deeds, your love, your faith, perseverance, all the things associated with the heart center as the love center. But you tolerate the woman Jezebel. This is the warning, the prophetess. And she teaches and leads my bondservants astray, so that they commit acts of immorality and eat things sacrificed to idols. Eating things sacrificed to idols is back to a religious. That's a trap. If you think you're getting to the throne in heaven by going through religious practices, you're at great risk, because it's something that happens in here. This is the body tabernacle. This is the body temple. This is the church, esoterically. And then Jezebel is mentioned during the sequence of events as well. And she symbolizes Babylon, and Ahab and Jezebel. And Ahab was one of those that commingled. He got corrupted. And later on it says, she commits adultery. That's the adulterous heart concept, is when Eve is under the influence of the serpent. That's an adulterous heart. Most reference in the Bible to adultery is referring to the adulterous heart. Then it says, I'm the one that searches the minds and hearts of the churches. So He searches the minds and hearts of men, the church, the body tabernacle. And then he says, but I say to you, the rest are in Thyatira, who do not hold to this teaching, who have known the deep things of Satan, as they call them. So he's kind of referring to it as, people refer to that as Satan, all the things that come out of a corrupted heart center. And then he says, he who overcomes and keeps my deeds until the end, to him I will give authority over the nations, authority over all those errant thoughts and lower self nations within us. And he shall rule them with a rod of iron, as the vessels of the potter are broken to pieces. So as you're going through this process where you're being deconstructed, your ego self is being deconstructed, you're getting smashed, and it feels like you're the pot the potter made, and he has to break you before he can reconstruct you. And then I'll give him the morning star. Well, that's the resurrection. That's the Christ, a Christed heart. The next is the fifth. It's the message to Sardis. This is the first of the heavenly chakras, above the heart. And it's here where, in the sequence of events, is where you get to see the nemesis for the first time. And you have to see the apostasy before the day of the Lord is going to come about for you. And so it says, the compliment, I know your deeds, that you have a name, that you are alive, but you're not dead. So this kind of gets back to the sheep. Every one of the sheep that Jesus shepherds has a name. So he those are the people that have said, Jesus, I believe in you, and I want to be your sheep. And Jesus says, okay, you got a name. I know you, and you know of me. So our relationship is going to change. And he says, I've given you a name. I know that you're alive. You're doing the caterpillar crawl, and I get it. He said, but you're still dead. You're still not awake. You're still naked, potentially to your shame, if you're not aware that you're asleep. And if you're the sheep that is in an ideology that does not make you aware of this nature that you have, you quite possibly could stay asleep and believe you're spiritualized. In verse 2, it says, wake up. You got to wake up. You come to consciousness and strengthen the things that remain, which were about to die. And we go through that process a lot, where we're about to make that happen, and then the goat slams the ram. It slams us. The lower side, the lower self, takes advantage of that oblivion of the higher self. And it says, for I have not found your deeds completed in the sight of my God. So he's basically saying, there's still more for you to do. You have to wake up. And so remember what you have received and heard, and keep it and repent. Therefore, if you do not wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know at what hour I will come to you. Well, this verse is basically repeated in the midst of the battle in the sequence of events later on in Revelation. But then, there's a few people in Sardis who have not sold their garments. They're clothed in white. They have awakened. And then he who overcomes will thus be clothed in white. You'll have rights to your white garment. And I will not erase his name from the book of life. So that's very, very key. You've got to get through that door. That is the door that Jesus is referring to in John 10. It's the narrow gate. And that person who is still dead, that person has to say, I need to be blind again. And that's how John 10 connects with the church at Sardis. The sixth is the message to Philadelphia. And He is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens and no one will shut, and who shuts and no one opens, says this. So that's the third eye. This is the third eye chakra. And when you open that eye, when that first happens and you're conscious, nothing can shut it. It's kind of a one and done thing. I know your deeds. Behold, I have put before you an open door. Once again, open those chakras, and you go through that door, which no one can shut, because you have a little power, and have kept my word and have not denied my name. Behold, I will cause those of the synagogue of Satan, those are the ones that remain in the natural body mode, who say that they are Jews and are not, but lie. They say, we see, we're spiritualized, we're saved, but they lie. I will make them come and bow down at your feet and make them know that I have loved you. And this kind of gets back to the parable of the 100 sheep. And it's more clear in the Gospel of Thomas. What it's saying is, if I have one of my sheep strayed, it was the largest of the 100, and it strayed away, and after much toil, Jesus went to find it, and after much toil, Jesus says, I love this one more than all the others. And that's symbolic of a sheep going, you know what, I'm got to be blind again. I'm going to go do my toil. I'm going to go cocoon, and I'm going to work through this. Christ is there with us, helping us through that process. And when we get through it, he loves us more than all the other sheep. Remember, he said, Jacob I loved, Esau I hated. He does not like that persona, the natural body persona. He likes less those in the natural body who say they're Jews, but they lie and remain a synagogue of Satan. So I'm coming quickly, hold fast what you have so that no one will take your crown. Well, then the next church, the next chakra is the crown chakra. And that's when we get our crown, we get our white garments. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar. This is really important. He who overcomes, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he will not go out from it anymore. And I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven from my God in my new name. So this kind of has a double meaning, within us. Once we get to this place, we don't go out anymore. It's not like it has to open again. It just happens one time. But it also has another connotation when it comes to the destination. For those that awaken, go back to the kingdom, the beginning when they were one. Those that don't, they go to the lake of fire. And when you go to the lake of fire, that's where Jesus says in the book of Thomas, you're going to see the other images of you that went before you. And they didn't die, they just become part of your celestial story. And then they're not visible. So when you're alive here in this incarnation, you can't see those of you that happened before you. And I just believe that's what that means. You don't have to agree. So this is saying, I'll make a pillar in the temple in this place we're going, the kingdom, from where we came. And when you get there, you don't have to come down here and incarnate again. We may have the choice to do that, but I think that's when it's over. And you get back into the Eastern religions, once you become enlightened, then that cycle of birth and rebirth is over, and you don't have to come back. And so the final church, the message to the church at Laodicea, it's this is the is what it is moment. It says, I know your deeds, that you are either cold or hot, or you're lukewarm. Those are the three paths we have. If you just remain in your ignorance of your divine nature and you're blind from birth, then that's when Jesus says back in the end of John 9, he says, that those people do not have sin. The sin is not attributable to them. That act of forgiveness is just baked into this program. And so those people are cold. They're just ignorant. of their divine nature. I mean, they're not stupid. They're just ignorant of their divine nature. They're blind, and they're naked to their shame. Or you're hot. You made it. You got your white garment. You're a son of God. I mean, you can come on up to the kingdom when you have your second death, and you're done. Then he says, I wish that you were cold or hot. So because you are lukewarm and neither hot nor cold, I will spit you out of my mouth. He's talking to the Jews that say they're Jews and they lie, and they remain a synagogue of Satan. That's who he's talking to. And then he says, because you say, I am rich and have become wealthy and have need of nothing, and you do not know that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. Once again, he's saying, you think you're there. You got everything you want. You're probably very comfortable in your spirituality. I mean, we're all born into an ideology of religion of some kind. And we pretty much automatically adopt it until we think it through on our own and say, is this really what I want to do? And it's really, really challenging to break that yoke. Because when you do, you're pretty much risking being just kicked out of that whole community, or making the choice yourself that you're not going to participate. But in our world, it's having that affiliation and having those connections and having those shared belief, and that's very, very comfortable. And man, it's just really, really difficult to do. And then he goes on to say, I advise you to buy from me gold refined by fire so that you may become rich, and white garments so that you may clothe yourself, and that the shame of your nakedness will not be revealed, and eye salve to anoint your eyes so that you may see. I mean, he just threw it all there, and it's like making goulash, man. He just said, hey, your nakedness, your shame, you got to get your clothes on. You buy gold from me refined by fire. Well, that's that. When you peer into yourself, into your subconscious, I mean, you just burn it up, as if your gaze is fire. Those whom I love, I reprove and discipline. Therefore, be zealous and repent. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and will dine with him, and he with me. He who overcomes, I will grant to him to sit down with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. So there you got the 7 churches. And the 7th is, it is what it is. There's 3 lanes: cold, hot, and lukewarm. You don't want to be lukewarm. Then there's the scene in heaven. And I'm going to kind of fast forward and go to the lamb that was standing between the lampstands as if slain. So that's saying, Jesus has already been slain. He's already been through this. He tells us there in 3:21, I've already overcome. And so this is the next part, is this lamb is taking the journey to overcome, his own personal journey. And it's a lamb as if slain. This lamb has this opportunity because of the testimony of Jesus. His testimony is the spirit of this prophecy. And it's because of Jesus demonstrating to us the Christ, the Messiah, and that we have the opportunity to do this. And that's when I get back to looking at Jesus as God. It distorts this because it takes your gaze away from the inside and really away from what Jesus is showing us is going on through the New Testament, and specifically the book of Revelation. So it's the Lamb is the last Adam. Became a life-giving spirit. And I look at Adam having those 2 natures. We're going to see later where Eve has 2 natures. Well, Adam has these 2. He has the first Adam that's unconscious and asleep. He's not awake. And then we have the second Adam that represents the ascension, and that's consciousness awakening through the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's what I think it means by he became a life-giving spirit. And then you quickly get to the beginning of the sequence of events. And here I'd like to just say a couple things and then shut it down. Because I've kind of brought some of this stuff up, but I didn't put closure to it. The behemoth, he eats grass. We're told in that what we just read in Job that he eats grass. Well, one of the first things that happens in this lower self, because beginning in chapter 6, begins the battle, and it's the 4 horsemen. They show up, but in verse 8:7, it says the first trumpet sounded. So this is the very first thing that happens in starting this battle. And the 4 horsemen have gone all out to different parts of the earth. They represent direction. The colors do. And so they're ready to go. When that trumpet sounds, the battle starts. And there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and they were thrown to the earth, and 1/3 of the earth was burned up. That's that first lower self. And 1/3 of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. So it kind of gets back to that, the Exodus and what God did to motivate Pharaoh to let him go. The ego self, you've got to take away those things that you attach to, break that down to get back to your authentic self. Well, here, this is signifying all the green grass being burned up, that's the food for the behemoth. And so at this point, the behemoth is starting to get starved. And I wanted you to see that significance. And that's the first chakra, that's the first spirit, the first church. Going to the second one, the beast is the bear, and it has 3 ribs in his mouth. Well, taking the rib out of Eve has significance. The 3 ribs has a secondary significance. When the rib is taken out of Adam to make Eve, and there's 12 ribs protecting the heart center. That's representative of one of the gates around your heart being open and allowing the serpent persona to penetrate and into the unconscious consciousness and assume this pretentious role of consciousness directing Eve. And that's the gap. That's how he gets in. Well, you go to the next level, the Babylon level, the bear has 3 ribs in his mouth. That's symbolic of the entire wall coming down, because when Babylon captured Jerusalem, the heart center, then they destroyed the temple and they destroyed the wall. So now Adam, those 12 ribs, there's just nothing protecting the heart center, Eve, from intrusion. And I just wanted to kind of give you that visual as you go through the rest of this. But that's really all I got for this one. And just remember, you really need to watch these sequentially for them to make sense, for everything to connect. And because I kind of want you to see this. I was laughing before I did this and said, I trashed like 3 or 4 videos, and they happened to have this section in them. And I was thinking, there's probably a lot of people out there going, yeah, no shit, Sherlock, you should probably trash all these. And because I know I'm not going to make everybody happy. And I really expect, if I ever get somebody to watch these things, or subscribe or whatever, that I'm going to get a whole lot more dislikes than I'm likes. And I'm prepared for that. I don't really care. But I wrote a book, my story. This is experiential spirituality. It's what I experienced. This is what I found. It connects for me, and it doesn't have to work for you. Hope you guys take care of yourself. See you later. Bye-bye.